Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing fine on this kind of cloudy morning out here as I look out my window. So I'm going to give you a little historical geography lesson about Michigan's Thumb area. In the fall of 1881, there was a great fire that destroyed close to 85% of Michigan's Thumb area. It's the most devastating fire recorded in history for the Thumb. From my research that I came across, they sent Sergeant Bailey of the Signal Corps of the U.S. Army to do research on the fire to see where it started and find all the starting points and gather all the data. So I got a lot of information from him, and I got it from several other resources. I'll show you my resources at the end for this. And what he found was, because of the dry winds and the fact it was a very dry summer, that this fire got going and was very hard to stop. So one of the first starting points are, again, here is the Thumb area, and one of the first starting points is up here near Bad Axe. It started about 2 miles west of there on September 4th of 1881. It moved north by Monday at 1:30 was up in Port Austin, which is up here. Within a half an hour, it had traveled all the way down to Port Hope because the winds had shifted. It also traveled down this way. Another area that it started was here in Carroll and in Tuscola County, and that traveled up towards the Cass River where it met the other fire in the north. A third starting point is north of Marlette, near Deckerville here, headed towards Deckerville, and that started as a result of dormant fires from August 31st, got rekindled from the winds, and that headed over towards the east coast on the water. Another starting point here was in K-Pac, and that is also started on August 30th, another day difference, but that went up into Sanilac County through Deckerville and Sandusky, also went over and affected in Lapeer County here. So as you can see, I'll zoom back out here a little bit, the Thumb area, here we have Port Huron. So I'll show you the counties here. Here is Genesee County, over where Flint is. You can see where it was affected all the way over towards Flint. You can see affected area all the way through Lapeer County. Here's Lapeer County. The majority of Lapeer County was affected. Major up here in the corner of Lapeer County. Here is Tuscola County. And you can see the majority of that was affected through here. Sanilac County, the majority of that, I'm going to say the vast majority of that was affected, except for this tiny little area here, and then a tiny little area up here in Sanilac County. And again, here is the Huron County. There's a small area up here where it was not affected as far as being burned, when I say not affected. And over here along the water, which is the Saginaw Bay, was not affected. So you can see this is Port Sanilac area up in Sanilac County that was not affected. And up here near Midden and White Rock was also another area that did not have burn affecting, but it still had a lot of effects from the smoke and ash. Zoom back out. So it was a huge, huge portion of the Thumb. So the fires lasted about 10 days. Many people actually went out into the lake to try and escape the flames, but so much ash fell onto the water that people had to actually dive down if they wanted to get a drink of water out of there. You know, back at the time it wasn't as bad to drink the lake water, but they had to go down 3 feet to actually get clear of any ash and debris and cinders that were falling on the water. I found where a man had been out in the lake somewhere, and he woke up in the morning. I don't know if he was in a boat or if he was floating on something. It didn't say, but there was actually a bear that was by him that had also been trying to avoid the flames of the fire and the heat. It's said that 7 miles, it's recorded out in Lake Huron that sailors on a boat could actually feel the heat from this fire. I don't know exactly where the boat was located when they were feeling it, but it was 7 miles out from land. Even Canada was affected. They call it the darkest day. Smoke went right over the lake over into Canada, and people actually had to light candles by about 2 in the afternoon because it was so dark from the smoke. And they were sending children home from school as a result. They talk about the winds being tornado winds, which actually is very extreme type of winds, which caused more heat and made boulders move like pebbles. I found. And also one wagon that weighed about 1,000 pounds was thrown 245 feet. Some of the vegetable fields within this area that the fire had jumped were still roasted. Even though they weren't burned, they were actually roasted because of the heat. There's no recording of how many people actually perished within this fire, but they did find 282 bodies, and only 167 of them were actually able to be identified. There were 15,000 people were homeless. And I know there's a TV show, I can't recall the name of it, where they came and did some research on the haunted thumb, and they discovered that the thumb is a very haunted place, and they believe it is a result of this fire. I can't remember if it's one of the haunted shows on TV there. But some of the people did survive. They went into their wells where they would pull up water to escape because they had no other place to go. Others got into their wells and they were found had perished as a result of suffocating from the heat and the smoke. There were many secondary deaths from burns and inflammation, but they didn't actually record those as far as deaths to that 282 that they actually found. So that's why part of the reason they don't have a total recording of how many. One of the things that I did find is the wind actually carried the fire from treetop to treetop. So it didn't even burn in places along the ground, it burned from the treetops to treetops. The Michigan Department of Conservation explained this phenomenon of leaping flames. I'm going to read a direct quote here that I have. As fire of major proportion creates its own draft, that is, it must suck in huge quantities of oxygens to continue its force. This explains the situation and accounts for the fact that the fire actually traveled for long distances in the air, leaving large unburned areas before it would settle to the ground again to gather new and greater force. That was from my resource Schultz, which was from page 81 on there. And fires like this can actually cause tornadoes, a fire tornado, which is a very unique thing. And those things can travel 300 feet in the air. And I do have some pictures of what a fire tornado would look like here. Here are some. And my dad had worked for the DNR in St. Clair County here. And he worked for Gilbert Joy, who was a DNR resource man. He actually witnessed one down on Harson's Island here in the 1980s. And I'm kind of assuming that they probably, because of this heat, they talked about the tornado winds, they probably had some of these also that happened. They didn't actually state it, but I'm assuming that they would have. Some of the causes of the fire starting is because we had a lot of loggers in the area. And, recalling your Michigan history, some of your Port Huron history, right here along Black River, we had a logging mill where they would saw the logs up and ship out the lumber. So there was a lot of logging that was happening in here. So the slashings that were left from it, it was a very dry summer that the streams and swamps actually dried up. And because it was so dry, the leaves were actually starting to turn on the trees very early that year. And people were starting to use that time to start cleaning up for their fall cleanup and doing a lot of burning, which a lot of those fires would have gotten out of control. And because of the telegraph lines had been burned and came down as a result of the poles burning, it took several days for even the south of the fire, anywhere south, to get word of it. So once the word got out, the great people of Port Huron here created an executive committee for relief. And they were able to start collecting money right away, got it on ships, because that was the quickest way to get up there, especially with all the burned out land to travel through. They took it right on ships, right up into Huron and Sanilac counties. And they were able to start getting money up there by the 8th. So even though it took 10 days for this fire to burn out, they were still able to get money up there within the midst of it. And they actually had checks, because this became a national thing, went into the national news, that all over the country they had heard about it. But so people from Detroit, Pontiac, and Jackson committees, because they also had those down there, down in here, were sending checks up to Port Huron, and we were shipping checks of money up to the people in the burned out thumb to help them. One of the interesting things was the Red Cross had been newly formed by Clara Barton. They hadn't done a lot at this point with the Red Cross, but they were able to really prove themselves during this time period. And they were able to get $80,000 raised. So remember, this is in 1881 funds. So I couldn't imagine what that would be equivalent to in 2020 funds. That'd be that could be like millions of dollars that they would have raised. They sent supplies like clothes, bedding, tables and chairs, food, medicine, and even some wood, because everything had been burned out, to the area, because they needed to have shelter, because remember, we are in Michigan and winter was coming. And the Red Cross continued to help with relief for a year and a half after the fire. And one thing I found was this was the first time the white flag with the Red Cross was raised on it over a disaster area. The Port Huron Committee for Relief was able to raise $1,312,648.27. The whole country, because again it went national, raised $3.25 million to help the people that survived this area. As far as mitigation results, there really became not a lot of restrictions, but they did put some on burning during dry weather. So also some of the things that came out of this was the DNR started creating controlled burns, where they go into areas that might be potential hazards and do a burn to eliminate that dry brush so we don't have more fires like this. So we do have a picture. I'll go over here to Port Hope. This is a chimney that survived the fire in Port Hope. Again, we'll come back here to the map. Port Hope is up here. So you can still see this chimney in Port Hope if you go there. That is something that has survived and has become a monument to the fire. I also have a picture of a plaque that I found. And I know on here it says it started on September 5th, but what I had found was it started on the 4th. So there's varying dates, but I'm wondering if this is actually as a result of when it got into the area where this plaque was placed. So to wrap up here, the fires, they're the worst. They're not the worst to be in Michigan, but they are some very severe, and it's the worst for the thumb. And it just happens to be close to where we live and affected people where we live here. And it took many years for that thumb area to start prospering again. The Red Cross was really able to prove themselves and that they're able to give disaster relief for people. And one of the big lessons to learn is you cannot predict the wind patterns, because the wind kept changing through this whole thing as they were going. So they never knew, and that's how it blew and went to so many different places and became very difficult to track. And as you can see here in my bibliography, I have several resources. One of them I have right here That is the third one here. This is a Michigan on Fire. They have a lot of other stories in here about Michigan fires. I also have another Michigan on Fire book too that was published. So many, but they didn't talk about the thumb fire in this one. They talked about it in the first book. I also interviewed a former DNR officer that was my father. He was a key person that worked there here in St. Clair County, so he knew a lot about fires and researching. So I hope everybody is well and stay in touch, and I hope you learned a little bit about a fire that happened in our thumb. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.